Good morning, folks, and welcome to the 36th Sustainable Ag Conference. I hope you enjoyed your first day, and we're excited to spend another day with all of you. I'm Karen McSwain. I'm the Associate Executive Director for Programs at CFSA, and I will be the host for today's workshop. You have joined the session, How to Be an Effective Community Advocate, presented by Dylan Turner, George Jones, Kara Rutter, Keith Sexton, and Matt Neese. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box as we're getting started here. And also please feel free to ask any questions in that chat box and our speakers will get to it. And now I am going to hand it over to the speakers after I do a little screen sharing.
All right, good morning, everybody. Hope y'all can hear me. My name is Matt Neese. I'm the South Carolina Policy Coordinator for the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association. I'll be kind of moderating and facilitating this panel. We're going to start off with just a short little, maybe 10, 15-minute presentation about how to be an effective community advocate. Hopefully that's why you're all here today. So we're going to go ahead and just launch straight into it. If you are here attending this workshop, let's put it this way, that means there's likely either some type of public policy, that means there's some type of regulation, some type of policy landscape that you operate within that you likely want to change, or you likely want to modify in some way. Or maybe not. Maybe you just like to learn more about the public policy landscape. It's very convoluted and complicated, which is why a lot of people choose not to be involved in advocacy. And we are here today to let you know that is not the case, that public policy can be changed. You can affect change in your community. And there are a lot of tools out there to help you in doing that. One of them is a new program that CFSA has begun offering this year called the Member Advocacy Program. And so this workshop here will kind of break down a few of the highlights of this program, what it can offer for you. And then our main event, we're going to have a panel with a few of our Rockstar Math graduates from this year, the first cohort, to talk a little bit about advocacy and what they learned from the program, some takeaways, and kind of answer any questions you may have. So let's go ahead and get straight into it. Again, if you are on this call, you are operating within the world of public policy, even if you don't work in that as a profession. So if you're farming, if you're just living, you're living within a world of laws and regulations, codes and attitudes that govern your daily life. And these are decided on the federal level, if it's in Washington and Congress. It can be at the state level, in your state legislatures. And it can also be at the local level, county and city levels. And honestly, it goes even further than that. It can go down to as low as school board, sheriff's department. There are institutions at every level of government dedicated to writing public policy that affects your daily life. And the most important takeaway from that is the system is set up to be static. Public input is not the norm by any means. The status quo is very powerful. And so the takeaway from that, though, is that things don't change on their own. You have to want them to change and take action to make them change. You owe it to yourself. If there are issues that are affecting you, that are affecting your business or your livelihood, it can be changed. It's just a question of arming yourself with the tools to make that change happen. So how is that done? Well, there's two main ways. One is grassroots advocacy and one is grasstops advocacy. We'll kind of take a look at grassroots advocacy first. And this is kind of what you think of when you think of activism. This can be a mass email or phone blitz. So this can be, sending out a message that everybody needs to call a senator's office or a representative's office and let them know how certain legislation affects you. Calling and blowing up legislators' phones, talking to their poor staffers and letting them know just what impact this has on them. This can be an op-ed blitz. One of the things we teach in our MAP program is that, public opinion is often shaped by the media. And if you're able to inject yourself into that conversation by some type of coordinated op-ed writing campaign, you are able to change the narrative. You're able to let people know their other opinions exist and just how these policies and issues affect you. Another tool we often recommend is community events. This can be when we've got our Farm Storm tour that we're doing with CFSA. It can be meet and greets. It can be farm tours where you'll bring people out to your farm. I know that both North and South Carolina have various farm tours where host farms will invite people out for meet and greets and for animal interactions and things like that. It's a great way of sticking your neck and your name out there and letting people know how issues affect you. Coalition building is another powerful tool. And by coalition building, we mean finding and identifying like-minded organizations that often share the concerns you do, and then leveraging your joint abilities and joint powers to affecting this political change. All of this said, the name of the game when it comes to grassroots advocacy and grasstops advocacy to a certain extent, but it's leveraging political pleasure versus political pain. Now, what do we mean by that? All politicians and policymakers, but especially politicians, they operate in a world where they thrive on political pleasure and do anything they can to avoid what we call political pain. So, what's political pleasure? That's increased campaign donations. That's favorable media coverage. That's earning fellow votes. Honestly, it's reputation. And then, as you can imagine, what is political pain? It's withholding donations. It's bad press. It's a bad reputation. So it's all about trying to tweak these knobs as needed to place pressure on elected officials. And usually that's done, as this last bullet point emphasizes, through quantity over quality. There's not a lot of high-level political discussions going on there. You're going to be trying to just brute force affect policy change. You can contrast that with grasstops advocacy. Grasstops advocacy is quality over quantity. And as you'll see here, this is a photo of Jared Cates, a fellow CFSA colleague of mine here, meeting with Representative Alma Adams in North Carolina. And lawmaker meetings are just one tool of grasstops advocacy, but they're an effective tool. If we say that grassroots advocacy is brute force or a broadsword, then grasstops advocacy is a scalpel. Grasstops advocacy are these high-level, very personalized interactions you'll have with policymakers. And that's done through one-on-one constituent meetings. Oftentimes at CFSA, we'll recommend trying to set up constituent meetings with representatives and senators and various farmers in their districts. Let farmers speak directly one-on-one to their elected officials, let them know how things are affecting them. That's done through lobby days. It's where we'll bring a handful of farmers or a coalition of like-minded individuals will go to the lobby of the North Carolina or the South Carolina General Assembly and interact one-on-one with politicians and just be the face of these policies that need to be changed. It's done through discussion with policymakers. We've talked a lot about elected officials, but when we say policy, they're not the only ones who affect policy. Oftentimes, these are governmental officials. These are agriculture directors, division directors. A lot of these folks who are working within cabinet-level agencies or government bureaucracies, they affect policy just as often, if not more often, those. So power mapping, that's finding out who so-and-so knows. That's finding out who Senator so-and-so sits on a committee with, finding out who he votes with, finding out who he can influence as well. So for instance, if you're trying to change ag policy, you may have a great relationship with someone who does not sit on an agricultural committee, but they may know somebody else who does. And so it's really just sitting down and figuring out where all the levers of power are and then influencing who you know and getting these conversations to happen. And then last but not least, comment submissions. Oftentimes, the USDA, for instance, will open up public comments to be made on various pots of money and how they should be spent. They can open it up on various rules and regulations. When FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, was going through a few years ago, there were several different periods where they opened up the dialogue for official comments to be submitted at a high level. And that's how they hear from you. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use grassroots or grasstops advocacy to affect change. And this is a good example here of the pros and cons of each. This is a very important slide because not everything is, there's always a certain way that you should approach policy change. And it's not, one way is not always the right instance in every circumstance. if that makes sense. So, for instance, grassroots advocacy is good for illustrating the scale and the impact of an issue. It's great for external outreach to the outside community. If you work in policy, as we do at CFSA, a lot of this may kind of seem like second nature, but the vast majority of people don't know these issues. And so grassroots advocacy is a very good educational tool. It is a less personal approach to policy change, but it tends to have faster and broader results. If only because, again, a lot of people all calling and emailing a few key representatives and senators tends to let them realize there's a large group of people who are impacted by this policy, and they want them honestly just to go away. Which again goes back to political pleasure versus political pain. Compare and contrast that with grasstops advocacy. As we mentioned, it's good for personalized one-on-one contact with policymakers, and it can be personalized in the sense of what you're able to do is do some research about, what boards of directors do they sit on, how they voted in the past. You're able to tailor your message to your target. It is great for behind the scenes efforts where you need delicacy or stealth, as we like to say. A lot of times when it comes down to grasstops advocacy, the public may not know you're making moves on certain issues because you're able to kind of walk between the raindrops and have these conversations with high level policymakers. And it's much more, I already said personalized, but it's much more agreeable because you're able to make these human connections with policymakers. And it tends to have slower but more precise results. When we say slower and more precise, grassroots advocacy tends to be very yes or no advocacy. Vote for this bill. Don't vote for this bill. Whereas grasstops advocacy tends to involve more, we want you to change what's in this bill. It's much more precise. You're able to kind of influence and have these high-level policy discussions that are more nuanced than grassroots advocacy. So again, time and a place for each, grassroots and grasstops. And we cover a lot of that in the MAP program. And so we'd encourage you to check out this program for more kind of in-depth information about how to utilize each of those strategies. Lastly here, the Member Advocacy Program, a little bit about how the program is structured. There's 2 cohorts every year. We do one in the kind of winter, spring, and then one in the summer and the fall. We're just now wrapping up our second program. We had a very successful first program, and the second program is going great as well. Within the program, there are 4 different interactive classes. We'll cover everything from how to communicate with and influence lawmakers, a little more about the role of grassroots versus grasstop strategies. We've covered that a little bit already, as well as effective ways to influence community action, how to leverage those relationships and become a force for change. So a lot of these tools, you're not having to invent or even reinvent. They're out there waiting to be utilized by you on issues that matter to you. And so a lot of why we designed the MAP program was we really wanted to teach a lot of our members, essentially, if you are affected by ag policy in local food systems, in pricing and markets, in regulations, in FSMA, you owe it to yourself to figure out how to affect this change. And so this program is a tool offered by CFSA for you to kind of arm yourself with these resources and arm yourselves with the skills you need to learn how to win and learn how to affect this policy. So we encourage you all to check out CarolinaFarmStewards.org for more information on this program. A lot of it's on there. The applications are on there. And so at all that said, I think we're ready to move over and hear from some of our Rockstar graduates. We'll go ahead and done with screen share. And I think Karen's already bringing everybody back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hope some of that was a refresher for some of y'all who've taken this course, and hopefully new information for some of you who are either considering it or at least want to explore policy advocacy. Let us know if you have any questions in the chat. I see lots and lots of good mornings, lots of very excited people here. We're happy to have you. So I think what we're going to do now is just go around. I've already introduced myself. And so I'm going to step back and we're going to go around and do introductions of everybody on this call. And we'll go from there. So Kara, would you like to kick us off?
Sure thing. Hi, I'm Kara Rutter. I'm the president of Project Victory Gardens. Communications Director of Farmer Veteran Coalition of South Carolina, and I sit on the board of the Mangalitsa Breed Association. So involved in a little bit of everything down here in South Carolina. And I had a great time with MAP, and we're really excited to tell you all about it.
Awesome. Keith?
I'm Keith Sexton. I'm a United Methodist pastor, a member of our conference's creation care team, and a beekeeper. And I really enjoyed MAP and look forward to talking to you about it.
Dylan?
Hey everybody, my name is Dylan Turner. I'm a graduate student at UNC-Charlotte, Salisbury resident, also a member of the Rowan Food and Farm Network, and also felt like I gained a lot from the MAP program. I'm happy to see my fellow cohort members here and looking forward to our conversation.
And last but certainly not least, Mr. George.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful Saturday out here in North Carolina. I'm George Jones. I live in Rougemont, North Carolina, which is just north of Durham. I'm the founder and co-owner of Inheritage Farms. I'm just kicking that off this year. But I'm also the executive director for Piedmont Business Capital based in Greensboro. And this was a great opportunity for me to learn how to participate in advocacy.
Terrific. Well, I got the opportunity, as did Nick and Jared on our policy team, to meet all these folks on our first MAP cohort this year. They definitely stood out. They were all rock stars in their own right. So we're going to pose some questions to them, and hopefully we'll get a little free-flowing discussion going here. Again, drop any questions you have in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer them. First and foremost, let's just start simple. I mean, what made y'all take time out of your day to learn about policy advocacy? I mean, it can be kind of wonky, but it does affect you. And so what initially made you want to reach out and start this process? And I'll just toss this up. Anybody can go.
Well, I think for me, I mean, you and I had talked a few times, primarily because of meat processing throughput. As you know, sitting on the Farmer Veteran Coalition of South Carolina board, a lot of our members were really concerned about meat processing throughput after COVID started. And so, you know, we had some conversations. We started talking about some other things, the cottage food laws, and there was a lot of, you know, there was a lot of things at the state level last year in South Carolina that were we hoped being addressed. Turns out not very many of them were addressed, but we hoped being addressed, and we wanted to be able to impact that. And so it seemed like a perfect opportunity.
I think for me, the big thing, I mentioned that I'm a graduate student, and, you know, my every day is consistent of research and trying to understand things. And I focused my research on food systems and understanding the challenges, but I didn't want to fall into that trap of spending so much time trying to understand something without actually doing anything to help alleviate a problem or, you know, create a solution. And so this seemed like a good opportunity for me to avoid, you know, staying trapped inside that silo and actually work with a group of people to make a difference.
Well, I think for me, it was interesting. You know, it was actually in a previous experience I was serving as a director for a program called Farmer Food Share. And this was during the time that the pandemic just kicked off. And I just realized about 8 months in the impact we were having in terms of just the lack of resources from small farmers, their participation in the supply chain, their participation with providing their produce to community. And so, you know, we looked up, and our organization was a rock star, if you will, Matt, in terms of distribution to communities and families. But when we started looking at the impact we were having on small farmers, it was really nil. And that really forced me to think about, you know, how does policy impact food systems, and how can small farmers participate in that food system structure? So that was really my open door to wanting to get more involved.
I was putting together a toolbox to get local congregations engaging in productive ways with the community around just food systems and creation care, addressing climate change. And I realized that the two general principles that begin our work is do no harm and do all the good you can in all the ways you can in every place you can, with all the people who can, ever as long as you can, that we needed another tool. And that was not only doing the good work in our communities, but having an effective way to talk with policymakers and decision makers to change the situations that got in the way and kept us in what I call a toxic charity mode, where we're not really lifting people up. We're addressing a problem with a Band-Aid when it really needs structural change. So that's why I came to MAP.
And hearing Keith speak just now really reminded me of one other thing I'd like to add about advocacy. And that is that language itself is very, very powerful in advocacy. Keith's ministry that he's working with, Creation Care, is another way of saying climate change. But for Creation Care is much, much more accessible, especially in the Southeast, than climate change, which has kind of become something of a buzzword within certain communities. And if you say that at a legislature, you don't know who's just going to immediately put up a block and go, well, I have no interest in anything else this person has to say, versus Creation Care, which is the same thing, but just a whole other way of approaching that issue and making it much more accessible. So politics in the English language is fascinating to me, in that you're able to just kind of change who your target audience is just by the language you use. So thank you for that, Keith. One thing I'd like to ask everybody, and you can be honest, was anybody nervous about the idea of policy change and becoming a community advocate?
I don't mind jumping in and saying that I was. Prior to enrolling in the program, I called my state senator, my U.S. senator once, and I left a voicemail, and I was petrified. I was worried someone was going to answer, and they're going to ask me questions, and I wasn't going to know what to say. So definitely nervous about it. But, with anything, it's repetition. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. And so, I was definitely nervous ahead of time.
Anybody else terrified? I was.
I think I was just really curious about the different approaches, and as you just mentioned, there's obviously contacting the state senators and representatives in the area, but you can also do op-eds and editorials and things of that nature to address the issue more substantively. So I think there's multiple mediums and ways to communicate, but I think it's obviously for first timers like myself and others, I mean, it's definitely daunting.
Well, and George also raises a great point. I mean, if you are someone who is shy and introverted and does not like speaking to people you don't know, you don't have to call and speak to your senator and have a sit-down one-on-one lobby meeting with them. I mean, that can be very daunting. You can write an op-ed. You can, engage in email campaigns. You can try to network with like-minded organizations who aren't going to disagree with you necessarily. So there are plenty of tools out there for advocacy that you can tailor to your personality and kind of find the niche that works for you. So that's a great point.
Well, let me offer my experience as someone who speaks for a living. You enter humbly into any conversation where the goal is to help people think and to maybe reflect on their positions. And so when Nick Wood invited me to go to the legislature and meet with 9 people, I had my elevator speech. I knew what I was going to say. But in one particular conversation with a legislator that we knew we could see us moving the needle, I got nervous because it was like the next thing I say could either move the needle or crash the needle. And so it was really a powerful, wonderful moment to recognize that our work together was really opening this person's mind to voting differently and to engage in their colleagues differently. And so, my first time, I think, in that meeting, I didn't crash and burn, but I got a little fire on the wings.
I think you're too hard on yourself with crash and burn. You're not a crash and burn kind of guy. So, but it is interesting. Can you anticipated my next question very well, which was lawmaker meetings. We mentioned about lawmaker meetings and how powerful of a tool they are in terms of, often grasstops advocacy. Keith, is there any more you can share about that? And, would you be able to elaborate for those who don't know, what do you mean by elevator speech?
Well, in MAP, you get a chance to write an op-ed piece and have your colleagues look at it and evaluate it. And what I learned is in about 25 seconds, that's about the attention span you have. You need to say what you're going to say. And so one of the things I learned was using the language of the person you're talking to. So I talked about expanding markets, creating new jobs, overcoming the cost of government regulation. And when you're talking to certain legislatures with that language, they hear you and they hear the impact that a small farmer has when they have to pay this exorbitant amount of money to do the GAP certification so they can expand their markets. And so that speech, you practice it so that it comes off naturally and you hit all your points. And you might have to craft it differently for a person who's in this particular place versus in a different place. So that's what an elevator speech was for me.
Simple as. Anybody else have any experience with lawmaker meetings?
Well, in MAP, I think also we were asked to contact a local legislator and set up a meeting and have a panel group of members, of advocacy members, participate around a particular subject matter or issue. I was a little nervous about that, but networking is something that you really have to do. So, just identifying people that knew people. And, we were successful in getting in front of the congressman representing our area. And that was pretty effective. And actually, the congressman showed up. It wasn't just his legislative liaison that participated. The actual congressional representative participated as well.
And that's a great sign. I mean, for people who have not had the opportunity to engage in lawmaker meetings, oftentimes you may be stuck with a staffer. You'll be stuck with a legislative staffer, their PR person, or the chief of staff sometimes. But when you're able to get a one-on-one with a senator or representative, that's a big win in and of itself.
Yeah, we're really lucky because between my husband Matt and I, we pretty much check the two big blocks. If you were a conservative legislator down here in South Carolina, so we're veterans and farmers, and so they've been pretty good at taking our calls and coming out. So one of the issues that I picked as I was going through MAP was quail eggs, which sounds like a really minor thing. But quail eggs are not covered under the egg license in South Carolina. So you can sell chicken eggs, duck eggs, turkey eggs, goose eggs, and guinea eggs in South Carolina under your egg license, but not quail eggs. And so, I mean, that was one of the things that I did. So I called up our representative and chatted with him about quail eggs. And, he talked to the SCDA and hopefully we can get some movement on that if they ever decide to come into session. But, it's just picking an issue, even if it sounds just as small as a quail egg, and going after that.
And Dylan, I see you've got some company in the chat here. Ashley with CFSA mentioned that in terms of jitters with communicating with legislators, she's almost always hoping for voicemail whenever you call. The worst case scenario is when someone actually answers your phone call and wants to know what you have to say, because that voicemail machine isn't going to talk back to you. It's going to be a very patient listener.
Yeah.
So it can be done for sure.
Can I say something to follow up on that?
Oh, of course, yeah.
I actually called my state House representative one time whenever CFSA was engaging in its farm share advocacy campaign to get that added to the NC budget. And the 2 times prior to that, I had received, or I believe his legislative assistant answered the phone, but this time he answered the phone. And that was really scary. But he ended up being really kind and receptive. And whether or not, he was truly receptive and was going to act on the things that I was suggesting, I'm not sure. But just that conversation was like one of those big moments for me. It's like, oh, you know what? This is a human being. And, if they answer the phone and I'm polite, they will likely be polite. And so, yeah, that was a big learning experience.
Yeah. And in fact, it's interesting because one of the benefits to doing policy advocacy for agricultural policy is agricultural policy usually, I'll say, does not have to be some standoffish thing with your legislator, usually, because farmers, growers, Food Network allies, they enjoy a lot of bipartisan support on average in the legislature. It's a very respectable, honorable job, as they see. A lot of legislators, they understand that. And so you've already got a lot of goodwill going, especially if you're a producer or a grower, with your legislators. It's just a question of making that phone call, summon up the courage to go out there and make that change. So next question, we talked about lawmaker meetings. From the grassroots side, coalition building and networking. We've talked about how building a group of like-minded organizations and individuals is kind of a force multiplier for change. Who here on the call, I know Keith has, and maybe he can speak to it, but can you speak a little bit towards working with identifying and working with allied organizations in the community toward, say, a common goal?
I can jump in real quick. I know
Sure.
through the Member Advocacy Program, I got involved later with the North Carolina Food System Coalition, which was also a group sort of spearheaded by CFSA. And through that, I met Keith and George as well, and kind of continued our relationship. But sort of starting at that larger group, I then became a little bit more active at the local level and participating with the Rowan Food and Farm Network. Met people there, and have since been able to just kind of help along with their projects, not necessarily bringing in a new, policy idea to change, but hey, we've got this effort going on. Can somebody do a write-up? Or hey, we need to make a phone call to someone. Can somebody do that? So just being there as another resource when they send out an email blast and like, hey, we need volunteers, being able to jump onto one of those opportunities has been super helpful.
And I can speak to it also. Thanks, Dylan. I also joined that North Carolina Food System Advocacy Coalition, and I think over the last maybe 7 months or so, 8 months, it's really been growing. It's pretty much now a statewide coalition of different organizations coming together to talk around a variety set of issues. I think I participated on the organizing committee, participated in the Farm Storm activities, hosted an event a few weeks ago. I really think that's also momentum for learning how to do greater levels of advocacy, because you really find that when you have like-minded individuals, for example, Keith and I, we pretty much we're lockstep on the issue of regenerative farming and looking at soil health remediation. And so these are things that come out of the advocacy network, is building relationships and really coming up with priorities that are akin to what you value.
And I'll hop in here too with another example, and a little bit of advice we give people in the MAP program. And it's, when you're looking at advocacy for an issue, oftentimes there may be allies out there who you don't necessarily think of at first, but would actually be your goals aligned. And one example I've got here in South Carolina is starting back in 2019, even a few years before that, there's been a movement to expand the Healthy Bucks campaign down here with SNAP and EBT benefits, where essentially it's a force multiplier. Every $5 you spend on fresh food at a farmer's market counts as 10. And it's a really great program, but the money has been running out lately. And so there's been a movement down here to try to expand that program. And when the coalition that's come up around this program and this advocacy campaign is everybody from the State Food Policy Council to farmers markets. Because again, if you think about it, you expand the Healthy Bucks program, farmers markets grow their audience, they grow their markets. So they have a vested interest in this as well. The schools of public health, producers and growers. I mean, there's a huge kind of disparate coalition down here of people who are all working towards the same goal, and that's expanding this program. But when you think SNAP and EBT benefits, you don't immediately think of farmers markets, but there's that connection there. And so it's all about just kind of sitting down and trying to think outside the box about who might be able to support you on this cause.
The power of the coalition that we're part of is that we're greater than the sum of our parts. You've got people from all over the spectrum on issues. They're passionate about it, but not entrenched. So we can have real respectful conversations. And then when we get to an advocacy meeting, you've got 8 or 10 people speaking on 8 or 10 issues with depth, power, and impact. And suddenly you're part of something much bigger than you could ever do on your own. And that's what I love about the advocacy process.
Absolutely.
But the other thing that I would say is it's important to remember that we're not always going to agree, even if we consider ourselves one coalition. Even within the Farmer Veteran Coalition of South Carolina, on the issue of we had a swine movement bill last year, and that got really heated down here in South Carolina between primarily, your commodity growers and then your small pig farmers that had, 3 or 4 pigs that don't have the bandwidth to, do vet inspections and things like that every time they move a pig to market. And so even within our own, coalition and our own group, it's important to understand that we're not always going to agree as producers, as growers, as people involved in food systems. We're going to approach it, as a small pig farmer that has 20 pigs on the ground. I'm going to approach things differently than, a large consolidated animal feeding operation would. And so I think that, it's important to acknowledge our differences, and we don't have to always agree, even as a coalition. And maybe that's something that you don't want to engage on, that topic. And you want to save that political goodwill for something that you can get a little bit more, agreement on.
Well, and not to put you on the spot, Kara, but for anybody else on the call, including Kara, speaking of working with like-minded organizations with a common goal, but maybe not always a common agreement on how to approach that goal, how do you navigate those differences in approach and differences in opinion? I mean, not everyone's going to agree, not just on the issue, but also how to approach and change that issue. How do you successfully navigate that?
And I think the meat processing throughput is probably an excellent, an excellent example of that. Matt chairs the NSAC meat processing throughput discussion, and over the last year and a half, that's gotten rather heated because you have, a lot of that is not really led by the farmer. And certainly not the small farmer, which is kind of the standpoint that most of us in CFSA would take. There's a lot of food systems folks on there, and I remember one time, I said something as the farmer, and I was very quickly corrected by another member on there that this isn't about the farmer, it's about it's about the processors. And it's like, well, the processors don't have a place in the discussion if there's not the farmer that's raising this. So I think that you just have to kind of find as much common ground as you can, and go after the biggest wins that you can unite an effort behind. And so, it might not be everything, and things move extremely slowly, very frustratingly slowly in some cases. I know we sit on some of these calls and they're like, oh, we had this great win in 2014. It's like, but that was several years ago. What have we done since then? And so part of it is you can't approach any of these advocacy and policy discussions thinking that you're going to get an immediate win. And that can be very frustrating. So, consolidate your gains, go with as much political pleasure as you can, and always threaten the political pain if that's not working, but accept that it's going to take a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to echo what Kara said, I mean, one thing we do teach in MAP is, forward progress is important, but it's also important is to celebrate your wins when you do get them, because it's all about building that momentum and not getting, I won't say disenfranchised or disheartened, but I mean, policy, as Kara said, changes slowly. It's very, very slow because it's not built to change. It's not set up to change. They call it the status quo for a reason. And so when you are able to find these wins, even if they might seem inconsequential, for your own sanity and your own morale, it's important to acknowledge that win, celebrate that win as your coalition, and then move on forward from there to find your next goal. Because you also can't rest on your laurels. You have to be able to keep moving forward and build on that momentum. Absolutely. Next question. We've talked a little bit about this kind of tangentially, but in terms of success stories y'all have, big or small, either with outreach, community networking, lawmaker meetings, does anybody have a success story they'd like to share about being an effective community advocate? Keith, I know you've had some successful lawmaker meetings up there.
Well, it's simply like we said, going in prepared, knowing the person you're talking to, and speaking language that creates, as Kara said, common ground. And then once you presented your story and your data, then the conversation really let them kind of guide the conversation. What's really helpful in that process is when the lawmaker starts asking you questions versus you presenting your ideas, then you can really tailor your information. In one particular meeting, the lawmaker was from Wake County, and as she listened to what we were saying, she brought back some things she was working on, and Nick was able to tie that into what our ask was for. And she said, well, I'm on board. And it was just really a powerful moment there when her common ground and Nick tied it together with the data that we had just offered her. So that was a success. We had one meeting that wasn't a success in the sense that we knew we didn't move the needle. But what he said on the way out is we shook our hand, and I believed him 100%. I'll listen to my colleagues on this. And so we immediately went to one of his colleagues that we knew he listened to, as you had kind of mentioned. We had a great conversation there and said, if you would, please speak to Senator so-and-so. And so that's kind of another way of having a success. You didn't make your case in that meeting, but you found someone who could help make your case. So those are two successes we had that day.
And that is a perfect example of the power mapping we talk about within the MAP program, because this may come as a shock to a lot of y'all, but a lot of senators and representatives, they may posture a lot, but they may not be that ideological. They may just kind of defer to the crowd in terms of who their friends are going to vote for, what bills their friends are going to take up. I know here in South Carolina, we've got a few allies on the Senate side who we've approached them with bills we would like filed and bills we would like to kill, and most of them will go, "That's great, but what so and so got to say about it? I don't have that much sway on this committee, but so and so does. Go talk to them. In fact, I'll put in a good word for you." And this is that power mapping is one of the best tools you can have at your disposal, because if you know so and so votes in lockstep with so and so, then you can multiply one vote by 4 votes if you know that they'll vote with the crowd. So that's a terrific example. Moving on here to kind of the MAP program itself. One question I'd like to pose y'all. Again, this is the first year we did the MAP program, and you all had kind of I won't say honor, maybe it's an honor, of being in the inaugural class and being our kind of guinea pig test subjects. So one thing we would like to pose to y'all, and then to the group, everyone watching, what is the most of the material that we covered over the 4 classes? What was the most beneficial to y'all? What was your biggest takeaway from the MAP program?
I think go ahead.
Thanks, Dylan. I really like the grasstops. I think that really spoke to me the most. We all kind of know about grassroots and things like that, but grasstops for a lot of the issues that we were concerned with was really beneficial. Just kind of that targeted reach out to lawmakers, and we did it both at the state and federal level with some different bills, strengthening local food processing act and quail eggs and a variety of other issues. But I think that using our platform, that was what worked really well for us last year.
Well, and just a quick aside, Kara, your quail eggs example is an issue that was born for grasstops advocacy, because in terms of motivating the community versus kind of an issue as abstract as quail eggs, that's not one that's really going to galvanize the community a lot, but it's one that could easily move with grasstops just by making these lawmaker meetings that you're already doing.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Keith, what about you? What was your most beneficial takeaway?
Like Kara, I like the grasstops a lot. I think the thing that really made the experience powerful was, of course, in my work, the power of story is embedded in everything I do. But then having Kara speak specifically about something to do with her pig farming or egg farming and her impact, when she has the ability to lay that out to a policymaker and say, this is what's harming me, and this change can make a big difference. I can now hire 2 more people if you make this change. To be able to see the power of story and frame that in our work as the centerpiece was really powerful to me. And so when you take story with you, or you take the storyteller with you, it really changes the landscape. And I think it's important to understand that the power of story can move the needle probably faster than all our data or all our positioning.
George, what about you?
I'm listening. I think in the entire MAP program for me was eye-opening. I think one of my takeaways that I really embraced was, learning how to communicate effectively with policymakers, whether it's in the op-ed process or whether it's through connecting the dots with the legislative staffers or legislators. Because I didn't realize that it starts with you. Sometimes you think when there's an issue out here that you have to be part of, something much bigger than yourself. But if you just take it within yourself to say, I want to make a difference, and you just take that simple step, whether it's an op-ed, sitting down and putting pen to paper, or whether it's just following up on a communication call. And once you've done that and you've got a support team like other advocacy members to work with, it really just shows you how powerful advocacy really is. Because at the end of the day, it's not the entire country coming on, agreeing to one thing. It's typically just 10 to 15 people building momentum towards taking action steps. And that's really what I felt like my takeaway was, that I'm now part of 2 statewide coalitions, and I'm just excited to be, instrumental in change.
Awesome. Dylan, you want to close us out?
Well, I'm not sure if I have much to add. I kind of relate to the last 2 things that were spoken. I mean, like Keith, understanding the power of storytelling. As an academic, spend a lot of time looking at data and trying to understand those, and you sometimes can mistakenly assume that they'll just speak for themselves. But understanding that if you have a personal experience or a personal perspective to ground your policy advocacy in is really, really crucial to persuading somebody. And then, like George was mentioning, being in a group and collaborating together on an issue. We talked about in the program understanding your circle of influence and your circle of control. You may go out as an individual to try to change something and run up against brick wall after brick wall and just think that policy advocacy is a fool's errand. But realizing that as you grow your circle and as you connect with other people, your impact can become a lot greater. And so those were 2 big takeaways for me, just to kind of echo what's been said already.
Yeah. And just in the chat here, Mike Hansen commented he had not thought of storytelling in advocacy before. And I mean, in the MAP program, we've got an entire section dedicated just to storytelling. There's a reason people like to see movies. There's a reason people like to read books. All of it involves storytelling, going from A to B with a character and how they develop. And storytelling is probably my favorite way of getting a message across about how policy affects people. Constituent meetings are the best because the actual story, the character from that movie is sitting in the office with the policymaker. So yeah, storytelling is super, super integral to policy change. Katie Murray asks, how can someone join CFSA's Member Advocacy Program? Go to www.carolinafarmstewards.org. The application period will be opening up soon-ish for the first cohort of next year. We start pretty early in the year, so we'll be reviewing applications. In terms of class size, we've got maybe 12 people who attend each course. We try to keep it the class sizes fairly small, if only to be able to get to know everybody and to be able to make it a little more personable. The bigger the class, the less personable it is. And the last part of our question, you do not have to be a farmer. You don't have to be a farmer to affect policy change. The policies are there. I have a few raised vegetable gardens in my backyard here, so I don't consider myself a farmer. But I can still go to the State House. I can still make phone calls. I can still email. I can still organize. So we encourage you, whether you're a producer or grower, farmer, or just someone who's passionate about food systems, passionate about local organic food, the MAP program is for you. Because again, these policies affect everybody, and you owe it to yourself to figure out how to change them. And Ashley says here, you can also sign up for our policy team newsletter. We announce it there first when it's going live. You get to also read cool little write-ups that myself and Nick Wood and Jared Cates all do, and just kind of be in the loop about policies that you can change now. Actual actionable items we include in that newsletter. So I've got one more question here for all of you before we kind of wrap up. And it's not just about the MAP program, but it's advocacy itself. Are there any misconceptions about advocacy that you had going into advocacy that MAP program changed? Are there any misconceptions that you've encountered, through learning the MAP program and through engaging in advocacy? I mean, was there anything you were just wrong about?
I think for me, I'm not sure if this is like a widespread thing amongst a lot of people, but I had the misconception that you have to be a policy expert in order to affect change. And I know, like Kara mentioned, there's a distinction between the grassroots and the grass tops. And I was thinking really like the grass tops. If someone asks me a question about a policy and really gets into the fine details, I'm probably going to be lost. But, getting started, number one, is important. And then number two, just understanding that as you add your voice to a collective of voices, that has power and that adds up. So that was a big misconception, is just thinking that you have to already know a policy inside and out before you can try to, affect change on it.
George, what about you?
I'm sitting here. Dylan just he just took all of my thunder there. No, I firmly agree with his sentiment in his comments. I also think the big miscue for folks is they think that it's somebody. They think that they can't make a contribution. They think either because they're limited in this area or not an expert in this area or don't have the resources in this area, they can't impact change. And I think that fear is what holds people back. And I think if there was one thing I learned in this process is that if you just get in the game, if you get involved, if you're willing to just participate, there's so much of a opportunity to do amazing things just by just taking that first step. So I think overcoming the fear of what you don't know is really important.
I think for me, it was overcoming my notion of what lobbying is and what lobbyists do, and the acrimony that seems to be part of the public square, and realizing as I did this work with our coalition that there's a lot more joy to this work, and it's actually fun to do, and it's rarely confrontational. And so that I had to get over the fact that what we see in the public square isn't what you do in advocacy. It's entirely different. And so I'd say it's probably the most fun I've had this year is some of the work we've done with these great people.
Kara, we'll close that question out with you. What are a few misconceptions about advocacy you had, either going into this or
we have not been farmers for very long. My husband and I just retired from the Army last year, so we're real knowledgeable about military things, but not so much farming. And somehow we kind of jumped in with both feet and ended up kind of being spokespersons for veteran farmers in the state. And so I think that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room about everything. You should definitely reach out, and that's how, you and I started talking in the first place. Was I figured out that Matt was probably the smartest person in the room on most things foreign policy related in South Carolina, or at least how to move the needle in South Carolina. And so that's the big thing is don't be scared to get involved and to get behind an issue because you are not the subject matter expert. I mean, we sit on a national, a national working group on meat processing throughput, and I had never taken a pig to the processor until 2 weeks ago. So get involved, and figure it out, and read what there is, and find who is the smartest person in the room and sit next to them. But don't let that stop you from getting involved.
Absolutely. And that's one of the shameless plug for one of our national partners, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition that Kara's mentioned a few times. We here at CFSA, I'm the South Carolina policy coordinator. We've got policy folks who work in North Carolina at the North Carolina General Assembly, but that's just the state and the local level. There's an entire area out there of federal policy that we've got allies, talking about coalition building, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. They exclusively focus on federal policy, and then they communicate to us, and then we communicate to our members how you can affect that change. And each INSAC committee focuses on a different subject, and you cannot be an expert on all of them, nor should you try to be. You've got meat processing, you've got climate change, you've got food safety, and you've got all these groups all working towards kind of the same goal of improving and creating resilient and sustainable food systems. And so there's lots of resources out there to draw on. So I think that's all the questions I have for y'all. I would like to say, though, shameless plug, in addition to the MAP program, again, go to carolinafarmstewards.org. We'll have more information there as the new cohort opens up for applications. We look forward to seeing them. For all of you who have attended this call, if you just got a fire lit under you and you're ready to be a community advocate and you're ready to get involved, there's about to be no shortage of opportunities to get involved and advocate for policy change. At the state level, we've got a big pot of COVID relief money that's slowly, but maybe surely working its way through the South Carolina State House that we'll need to advocate for because there's currently money in there for local food system development. In North Carolina, there's a lot of issues coming up there as well. And most importantly, at the federal level, the Farm Bill. Every 5 years or so, there's a Farm Bill package that comes through, and it's the single most comprehensive and massive package of money for farm and food policies to go through in Washington. And they need to hear from us. And the bill will be taken up in 2023, which sounds like it's a long way away, but the time to advocate and for policy change and to advocate for what is and is not included in that bill is starting now. And I know that we've started the Farm Storm Tour at CFSA to build more community advocates. So please make sure you sign up for our policy team newsletter. We dropped a link here in the chat. Our newsletter is the easiest and best way to be kept in the loop on CFSA policy happenings. And that's not just the MAP program. That's action alerts that we need you to take action on. You can email, you can phone call, you can meet with legislators. We'll help you set up constituent meetings. So all of this information we presented to you today and discussed is not some abstract information. These are all things that we expect and hope that you're able to utilize for real policy change here in the coming weeks and months and years. So with that, unless you have any further questions in the chat, or is there anything else, any parting expressions or phrases y'all would like to leave us with here? Well, all that said, I really, really appreciate y'all taking the time this morning to talk about your experiences with the MAP program, with your experiences with policy change and community advocacy. You all impressed us so much in this first program, and I'll speak for everybody on the policy team. We are very grateful to count y'all, not just as MAP graduates, but as policy advocates.
Ditto.
I'm going to jump in before Matt goes, because as one of the speakers, I want to say thank you to Matt and the rest of the folks on the panel. This is usually where the audience and everybody in the room claps and says thank you, but they can't see the audience in the room. They can just see me. So I'm clapping for everybody who participated this morning and saying thank you very much to our panel speakers. That was a great webinar, and thank you to the participants who joined us this morning. And I hope everybody continues to have a great Saturday. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.